All right, so moving in to 9.6, this is our final method on how to solve quadratic equations, and it's called the quadratic formula. In our lesson, we're going to go over what the quadratic formula is. We're going to talk about when to use which method because we now have 5 or 6 methods. And then we will talk about how to know, using what's called the discriminant, are how many solutions we have without having to solve for the whole thing. 1, 2, 3. Yes, 5 methods because I needed to make sure of that. I don't know why. All right. I am going to split those into 3 videos because just solving, even though it's simple, takes a bit. So here we go. What is the quadratic formula? If ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, notice it needs to equal 0, and a does not equal 0, because if a equals 0, then it's a linear equation, not a quadratic, then the following is true, and that is that x equals the negative b, but you will hear me say from here on out, opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And if you need a catchy tune to get that formula stuck in your head, come talk to me. I've got a YouTube video, but really you just say it to Pop Goes the Weasel. I'm not going to sing it for you though. I will tell you this, when I taught this at high school level, I had several students that you could see were singing the quadratic formula to Pop Goes the Weasel because it helped it stick. It was just that rhythm. That rhythm helps get it to stick in your head. All right, so starting with our first problem. When I look at this, I see my first issue right here, right? We are not equal to 0. So the first thing I need to do is make it equal to 0. Now, if it's equal to 0, you're good. You don't have to do a step like this. But I've got to make it equal to 0. So now I have x squared minus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Now, just a reminder, our quadratic formula is x equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So, as before, and you know I like to do it, I give my ABCs. What does A equal? So in this case, A is 1, B is a -2, and C is a -8. And I apologize if this starts to look very cramped and small, but we've got quite a bit of work to do ahead of us. So we know that X equals opposite B. So my B is a -2, so opposite B would be a +2. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root of -2 squared minus 4 times my A, that's 1, times my C, that's -8, and then divide all of that by 2 times 1. So quadratic formula really is just substitution property. And here's a formula that just always helps us find our answer. You can use quadratic formula on every problem. Now, it would be a lot of work for some of those really easy problems, but technically you could use it. From here, we just simplify, right? 2 plus or minus, I'm going to focus in on the square root real quick. Square root of -2 squared is 4, and then -4 times a -8 is a +32, so plus 32. 32 times 1, still 32. Divide by 2 times 1, which is 2. And then I'm going to simplify that one more time. I'm going to bring that one this way. So we're going to have 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 32, which is 36. Divide by, I don't know why I put a 1 there. 2 times 1 is 2. I don't know why I wrote a 1 next to it. So 2 plus or minus the square root of 36 over 2. From here, I've got one more step because I know my answer to that square root of 36. So I have 2 plus or minus 6 divided by 2. And then from here, I split into 2 formulas, right? I'm going to have my 2 plus the 6 divided by 2, and then I'm going to have my 2 minus the 6 divided by 2. So 2 plus 6 is 8, divided by 2 gives us 4, and 2 minus 6 is negative 4, divided by 2 equals negative 2. And so our two answers will be that x equals a negative 2, comma 4. And those are my two roots, my solutions to this problem. All right, simple enough. I do want to point out, yes, we could have factored this. We could easily factor it. We probably would have gotten there faster. But having the whole numbers makes it easier to show how the quadratic formula works and the fact that it technically can work on all of them. All right, on to our next example. We have this lovely word problem. I know sometimes I read them all out, but this is the first thing I go to. How far from the athlete will the ball land? So that is looking for our zeros, right? So we're looking for those solutions. So I'm going to take I'm reading through, they give me my equation. I don't need to go further than that because once I have my equation, I can solve it. And so I'm just going to rewrite that so we can more easily see it. Y equals a negative 0.04x squared plus 0.84x plus 2. And then I'm going to list out my A. A equals a negative 0.04. B equals 0.84. And C equals 2. So just like before, I'm going to plug in. I've got opposite B, so B is positive, so I'm going to have a negative 0.84 plus or minus the square root of B, so 0.84 squared minus 4 times A, negative 0.04 times C all over 2 times A. Now I do want to warn you when you are plugging, if you are typing a lot of this into the calculator, you need to be very, very careful because depending on the calculator, if you don't use parentheses correctly, it may not get all of that under the square root. So I highly suggest doing it chunks at a time. But if you don't want to listen to me, and you're trying to just plug it all into the calculator, you really, really have to be careful. All right, we're just going to simplify 0.84 plus or minus, and then on our square root, b squared, let me get the work I had already worked out so that you don't have to wait for me to type it all in. B squared is a 0.7056. And then negative is going to make this positive. Plus, and then 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 0.04 is 0.32. And then all of that is over 2 times 0.04 is a negative 0.08. Okay, now next one, kind of creep over here, negative 0.84 plus or minus the square root, and 0.7056 plus 0.32 gives us 1.0256 all over a negative 0.08. We get a negative 0.84. I'm going to take the square root and approximate it. I'm going to round to 3 decimal places. So I get plus or minus, oh, don't do that to me, plus or minus 1.012 all over a negative 0.08. And then this is where we split that out. So I'm going to have negative 0.84. Sorry, I've got a fly bothering my face. Negative 0.84 plus 1.012 divide by negative 0.08. And I'm going to go ahead and finish this one out. So when I add those together, my numerator becomes 0.172 divided by that negative 0.08, which gives us approximately a negative 2.15. And then we do our negative 0.84 minus 1.012 divided by a negative 0.08. We do that subtraction and we end up with a negative 1.852 over a negative 0.08. And when I do that division, we end up with 23.15 meters. Now, we're doing a real life situation and we're wanting distance, and distance can never be negative. So that automatically takes out this negative 0.215 as an answer. And our answer is 23.15 meters. Now, if you notice, this actually does really well, quadratic formula, when we're not getting whole number answers. Can it solve everything for us? Yes. But it actually makes it easier for us to do the work when we were working with maybe they're primes, right? They're quadratics that we can't factor. Or we're working with such big numbers, it's just easier to plug it into this formula than it is to actually try to factor. And so those, we're going to talk in the next video about how do we go through that process of determining when to use which method. So I'll see you on the other side with that.